So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our first generative AI talk of the trimester. We're very, very honored to be joined by Dr. Martin Compton, who is an associate professor of academic practice, inclusion and innovation, and head of the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching at the University of East London. Dr. Compton champions compassionate approaches to teaching and learning, and his recent work examines assessment innovation in the age of AI and advocates for developmental feedback practices that decenter grades. He's an experienced digital educator, certified member of ALT, which is the Association for Learning Technology, and a principal fellow of the HEA. Martin, we're very honored to welcome you to UCD today virtually, which you should be thankful for as we're flooded out, many of us in the area. We've had a big storm. I think it's headed over to London as well. As I mentioned, Martin will be speaking for a little while. And then if you have questions as he's speaking, feel free to pop those in the chat. I'll moderate those. And when he's done, we'll start going through the question and answers. So with that, I will turn things over to you, Martin.
Thanks, Lee. Greetings, colleagues. It's a bit of a grim day here as well, so I'm glad I didn't have to go out at all, other than to drop my daughter off at school. One thing that I should note is the job that Lee described to me as holding is one that I've only held for 7 days so far. And my previous role was the AI and Innovation in Education lead at King's College London. So some of the references that you'll see in the presentation are to King's, because that's where the AI focused work was happening. I note that many of you will be eating lunch, so you may not wish to have cameras on, but I've got 2 screens going here, and if you are able to turn a camera on and give me a wave, say hi, it's nice to vibe a little bit off at least a few faces. Hello, I see some coming on now. That's wonderful. No obligation, of course. I mean, you might be in your pajamas. I don't know. At least I hope you're not if you're in the office, but nevertheless, it is really nice to see people. I'm going to stick a link in the chat, and also I'm going to share my screen so that you can see the slides as we go through. But there will be some opportunities to interact, or at least one opportunity to interact. And if you want to follow the links immediately, you can do that in the app. You can also, now that I've displayed that, use a mobile device to scan the QR code. That's the word I'm looking for. Oh my gosh, I'm getting old. Scan the QR code, and that will enable you to participate too if you've got a mobile and you'd rather not use your existing screen. So I'm going to get away from the irritating GIF on the opening slide. But one of the things that I like to do as much as possible is test out innovations in AI to see whether they have genuine utility, whether they're just novelty, whether this is something that can improve my teaching, my students' experiences of learning. And one example that you can see on there is my attempt to do that. So not so long ago, about 6 months ago, Midjourney, which is an AI image generating tool, introduced an animation feature. And so I took an image that I previously generated and I animated it to get the idea of this academic or professional services member of staff wandering up and down thinking, what do I do with AI? Do I really try and engage with it in a sort of fiery embrace, or am I a bit more frosty towards it? So that's what I was trying to illustrate with that. And I do like the idea of being able to generate really bespoke images. But then if you look at the environmental cost in terms of water usage to create things like this, it's huge compared to data in the form of text, if you're using a large language model like ChatGPT or Gemini. So is it worth it? I don't know. Probably not. But you will see some examples of things that I've tried to do as I go. And you will need to start making informed judgments about whether these things are worth it or not. There are some people out there who are really well versed in the relative cost and the actual cost in terms of water consumption, environmental impact, and those kinds of things. John Ippolito is a real luminary in this space. Anyway, I promised interaction. 45 of you are logged in. I would like you to offer an anonymous response to the four statements that we've got here. You'll notice on the left, we've got strong disagreement, on the right, strong agreement, and then a couple of positions as you go, with ambivalence sitting right in the middle. And as you do these, don't worry about whether you need to get the right answer, because there isn't a right answer. There are opinions. And these are opinions that are changing and emerging as we go. Once we get to about 20 responses, I'll reveal them, and you can then calibrate your own responses against those of your colleagues as well. So my screen's gone a bit funny. I need to organize it better. That was what was accounting for my hesitancy earlier. Everything went all funny. Okay, so we've got 20, 21, 22 responses in. Let's reveal what we've got here. What I'm doing mentally, of course, is I'm comparing UCD with other institutions and with King's in particular. I haven't had the chance to ask these questions of my colleagues at UEL yet, in terms of calibrating institutionally against one another. And it's interesting. So what you can see here is this blue curve here, or shape, is the spread of responses. And if I hover over that, you can see that 11 people strongly agree that AI is making us stupid, whereas conversely 7 disagree. But you can see there is zero consensus at UCD based on the evidence that we've got here already. Many of you think it is making us stupid. Many of you think not. Many of you are undecided. Many of you are tending one way or the other. What does that mean in terms of what we do day to day, what we do strategically, how we communicate this to our students? What are the implications of this? Very similar when I asked this question at King's, at departmental level, at faculty level, and the consequence that we found at King's, and I expect you'll find this as well when you speak to students, is that students are getting mixed messages. So they're getting enthusiastic engagement responses from some people. Oh, you should try using it for this. I used it for this. It's brilliant for this particular thing we do on this particular module. Fantastic. And then the next lecturer says, I don't want you touching it. On pain of death, I will kick you off my course if I find you've been using AI. The two extremes and everything in the middle. So what I've been arguing is that we need to at least have consensus in the way in which we communicate this diversity of opinion. It isn't something like, people compared it to COVID and the pivot online, and people are saying, yeah, it's the same, it's a crisis, we have to adapt, it's a technological evolution. But without consensus in this space and without fully understanding what is in front of us, it's very difficult to reach that. So how do you, at whatever level you are at in the institution, find a way to get consensus, say, amongst those lecturers who are teaching on a module, or amongst those module leaders who are teaching on a course or program, whatever you define them as, or within a department, or within a faculty, or across the whole institution? That's a bit of work to do there. And finding a way to articulate that is really difficult. But involving students is something that I would encourage you to do. This is really interesting here, because irrespective of whether we think AI is making us stupid or not, there does seem to be an emerging consensus, a move towards, though still not universal, as you can see from the data here from 44 colleagues, is a tendency that's being reflected across the sector. And that is an agreement. Oh, by the way, my questions are terrible. Don't use them as a template for good research questions. We need to change what we teach and keep up with innovations including AI, in relevant industries. Keeping up with relevant industries is probably a given, but changing what we teach is something that people will argue about a lot. Because if you introduce something, presumably something has to drop off the end. And nobody wants to lose their module, their input, their expertise, the thing that they've taught so well and so is so beloved to their professional identity for years. So where's that space going to be created? What are you going to do if you're having to change what you teach? And then the follow-up component to that, how we teach and assess to acknowledge the impact of AI. What I would like to do is to enable people to change how they teach and assess with a positive motivation. But at the moment, I think it's fair to say that we're changing how we assess somewhat knee-jerk still, somewhat reactively, somewhat anxiously, in many cases in a blind panic, because we're seeing examples of students inappropriately using AI to submit take-home written assessments, for example, or completing online multiple choice quizzes in 30 seconds when it should take them an hour. These kinds of things are happening. So what do we do about that? And this used to be controversial, the last statement here, but it doesn't seem to be so much anymore. Whatever our role, we must learn to use these tech to be effective going forward. I know plenty of people who will say, I'm not touching it. I hate it. I hate everything about it, from the companies that are pushing this through to the environmental impact, data insecurity, provenance issues, IP issues, all of this. I'm not touching it. And yet, in my position, I will argue that I think we all have an obligation to touch it, not embrace it, but to engage with it in a way that allows us to be adequately informed to, if this is what we want to do, to make even better informed arguments in terms of resistance, or to better understand the technologies that most surveys are saying 90% of our students are using already and routinely. It's not an easy picture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer the critical issues, and then I'm going to suggest a sort of broad strategy that you might then be able to apply whatever level you work at or whatever it is that you do within UCD. So anyone want to offer me a response in the chat, or you can switch your mic on and shout it out? Who supposedly said this? For this invention will produce forgetfulness in the minds of those who learn to use it, because they will not practice their memory. This technology will make us stupid, he supposedly said. Who was it, and what was the technology? Any philosophers in the room? There's a clue there. Socrates, yeah, absolutely. We don't know whether it was verbatim, but this was attributed to him in Phaedrus by Plato. And of course, the technology is writing. So the idea was that to be educated, to be informed, it was all about the use of the memory, and the challenge of the memory was recording things on writing. I think further in the book, writing is described as a bastard child of argumentation, because it's static, it's fixed, it cannot change, all of these kinds of things. And it's really nice to see that for at least 2,500 years, we've been concerned about technology. This is something that was true then as it is true now, and that people were making the argument that utilization of technology would lead to things such as withering, attrition of cognitive function, or what we hear commonly now in relation to AI and the arguments about AI making us stupid is cognitive offloading. And cognitive offloading has got a really, really bad press lately because of its association with negative impacts of AI. But any technology that we use, any process that we use to facilitate getting our arguments in place, whether it's word processing, whether it's taking notes, whether it's recording something, whether it's bouncing ideas, whether it's sharing something, all these things are a form of cognitive offloading. There is positive cognitive offloading and there is negative cognitive offloading. It's cognitive offloading that impacts on learning that we really need to be focused on. What I'm seeing, though, is a lot of generalization and actually quite unsophisticated arguments on education focused social media channels on LinkedIn or Blue Sky or wherever that I think are unhelpful. There's pieces of research coming out of MIT, for example, that people are using as the sort of final nail in the coffin of AI. But it doesn't account for actual workflows, ways that these things are being used. And some of my research is involved on looking specifically at that. So I think we need to be very careful about what we say um, as a generalization. We need to be much more sophisticated and nuanced and complex in the way that we approach these things. So bear that in mind. That's one in the negative column for Socrates, but he's going to appear in a little while in a much more positive vein. Um, of looking backwards to look forwards, and if we're going to talk about classical philosophers, we may as well look to history for other examples of where we've been confronted with technologies that amaze us and bring terror to us. And it goes back to the dawn of civilized time. So Hephaestus constructed Talos, the great bronze giant, for King Minos to defend Crete, but was famously defeated by Jason of Argonaut's fame. But this great bronze statue, human, but massively human and, absolutely terrifying. Created in this case by a god, an Olympian, but for the benefit of man, but ultimately failing. We have things that are a little bit more whimsical, such as the karakuri puppets, Japanese karakuri puppets. And I don't know if you've ever seen any of these in real life or in museums or in videos. They are constructed in a way that will make them move in these weirdly, incredibly human ways. They're absolutely remarkable. And then we've got stories like the defecating duck, which actually turned out to be a con, but it was this idea that you could have a mechanical device that would eat food and then defecate the way actual ducks do it. It just blew people away when they first saw it. And being amazed by technologies, but also fearful of technologies, I think can't be better represented than by the story of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. All of these things show us that there is a consistent narrative across civilized human time about what technology is for, who creates it, who controls it, how it amazes us, how it conceals actually the way that it's working, how once we understand how something works, it takes away the sheen and the glamour. Do we know how large language models work sufficiently enough? Not technically, not from a computer science point of view, but well enough to know that when I put a query into Gemini, it's not drawing on a database to give me the information. A lot of people assume that, but that's simply not true. That's not how they work. Are you in a position to tell your students that? And that is why hallucination is a possibility. If not, how are we going to find out about this? How are we supposed to know how much is sufficient in this space? I can get in a car and I can drive it. Back in the day, when I first learned to drive, I'm ancient. I used to drive cars that were first registered in the 1960s. They would fail frequently. And I had to be able to open the bonnet and fiddle around with things, which I could do. I can't anymore because they all require computer diagnostics. So do I need to know what's going on under the hood in order to drive that vehicle? Can I use that same analogy to help me understand better what's happening with AI, or is it unnecessary? Do I just need to know what happens when I put something in, when something comes out? How far do I need to take it? And how far do I need to be scared of it? Okay, this is the second point of interaction. I'll reload the QR code for you. I'd just like you to plot on this fire to frost image here where you are in terms of your own personal use, personal perspective. Enthusiasm on the left through to pragmatism, reluctance, skepticism, and resistance. And you can see as the dots appear where you are located in relation to your colleagues. We've got 64 people, so it's going to be an interesting um, data point here. I'm not sure what the difference between reluctance and skepticism might be, but it's how you prefer to define yourself. Um, okay. Okay, so we've got people going exactly on other people's dots, which I like to see. So we've got two enthusiasts in the room, one super resistor, and then clusters around pragmatism and skepticism. I would put myself probably in with the pragmatism by and large, though there are some areas where I'm more enthusiastic and some areas where I'm absolutely resistant. So it does vary, and I know that my question might be a little bit unfair. But I think this is really interesting. And if you ask students where to pitch themselves, you find that whilst more students in any given sample will say that they use these technologies, you also find that more students tend to want to present themselves as being skeptics or resistors. And that's an anomalous component of a lot of the survey stuff that's happening, and really quite interesting. Okay, so the first challenge was that one, that there is a diversity of views. If we haven't got consensus, how do we establish a program level policy or practice, let alone faculty or an institutional one? How can you do that when there is such diversity? That's the first challenge. The second challenge, I think, is to do with academic identity, conservatism sometimes in practices. You argue with me on this if you like, but I think that by and large, despite all of the effort of teams like Lee's team and the one that I lead to engage people with scholarship of teaching and learning and evidence of the impact of active-based strategies and so on and so forth, we tend to still default to the conventions of not 20th century but 19th century pedagogic practices. Large lectures for convenience, one size fits all, often unidirectional, and then seminars or labs plus take home written assessment plus some kind of examination. That's the default that's done us well for a number of years, or some people would say it hasn't done us very well. And that conservatism matched with I know what I know, comfort in my own practice, comfort in my own professional identity leads to things like this. So this is a an example of AI used in a discipline where, if you think superficially about it, you think, well, why would I need AI in history? History is artifacts, documents, it's the past, everything's gone. My discipline is history, by the way. But this is, I think, a really interesting piece of work. It's called Ithaca, and it's a Google project, it's Google DeepMind project, and it's a machine learning algorithm trained on 175,000 data points. That's 175,000 Greek inscriptions. And what it does is it enables historians who are classically trained, who can speak Greek, to better interpret broken or damaged pieces of inscription. And the claims, I can't validate them myself, but the claims are that it increases not only the rapidity with which you can diagnose or predict missing pieces of inscription, but also the accuracy therein, as long as the AI is coupled with human expertise. And I saw this presented to the history department at King's, and one of the senior academics there stood up at the back and he was literally purple in the face with rage. And he said, and I quote him here, but this isn't how we do history. And it really struck me. It really struck me that his resistance wasn't because it's damaging the environment or because we can't necessarily verify or because he understood something about the technological background of the machine learning algorithms. It was because it was change and it was different and it was not what he was used to. And I would counsel against those kinds of instinctive reactions and separate those in our own minds from actual reasons, from convention, change resistance reasons, either in ourselves when we're being reflective, amongst our colleagues and our peers, indeed, even amongst our students. And managing student expectations when they come to institutions, I think, is one of the biggest jobs that we have to do when we're affecting or trying to effect changes in the way that we do things. And if we go back to the initial survey that I gave you, many of you are arguing, I say arguing, that's a bit strong, would agree with the idea that we need to change components of our curricula, maybe the way that we teach as well. How are we going to prepare students for that? How are we going to prepare our academic colleagues who are more resistant to change, like my history former colleague there? So that's one example. You can follow all these links and look at things later. I think the third challenge is around AI literacy, and that's not only staff AI literacy, but also student AI literacy. A lot of people still carry the ideas that students are digitally literate from birth, they carry phones around, but actually, in terms of the technologies that we want to use, they are often absolutely hopeless and or ill-equipped. So at UEL, most students, I think the majority of students, have a primary device, and that's a mobile phone, not a laptop or a tablet. It's in an area of high poverty in London, but it's shocking to see the numbers of students who only have one internet connected device, and that's a mobile phone. So, what does that mean in terms of pedagogy and practice and expectations and accessing resources in the VLE and all of that? It's massive. And the way in which they are using tools is very often problematic as well. So the facility to develop their literacy and academic staff literacy is something that we need to do. And then within that is all of the issues that arise there. Lee, have you got your hand up? I'm trying to. Uh,
No, you're okay.
oh, okay, I can carry on. Sorry, I just saw something pop up on my screen. So, how do you deal with that? How do you confront that? Because the more you learn, the more you realize that there are problems. Um, but we need to be informing our students about the issues like hallucination, like bias, like privacy, like trust, like environmental damage. But who takes responsibility for that on a course? These are questions that I think all need answering. If you follow this link, it will take you to an open page on um, the course that we developed at King's called AI in Education. And this video that you can watch here is an AI avatar hosted video, which raises all sorts of questions itself as well. Um, I'm going to go back only 100 years or so this time, but I think that this principle from Evelyn and John Dewey is a really powerful one. If we teach today's students as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow. And I don't think it's ever been true than it is at the moment. You can argue with me on that one if you like, but I think it's a really powerful message that it's so easy to think, well, I did it. I mean, when I did my degree, my dissertation was on policing in the 19th century, and all of my source access was on microfilm in the history archive, and it was like microfilm machines advancing forward, backwards, getting the right reels and everything. What a skill I developed! It's pretty much absolutely useless and redundant now. And holding on to that because I had to go through that pain would be doing my students a disservice when I need to make sure that they're adept at accessing and critiquing sources that are available digitally. Another driver here, another challenge is one that I have the biggest problems with because a lot of the changes that are happening are changes that I would rather weren't happening personally, as someone of a certain vintage. But the reality is becoming increasingly apparent. The number of jobs that are being displaced, a lot of them white collar graduate entry jobs. So, what are we preparing our students for? Where are we going to go with that? WEF offer a somewhat more optimistic perspective, arguing that there may be 100 million jobs displaced, but we're going to create nearly twice that in terms of different needs. Might take that with a pinch of salt, but whatever's happening, new skills are being required, new skills are being demanded. employer forums. We had a massive one at King's about 8 or 9 months ago. And I asked CEOs from all these industries that love King's graduates, you know, how many of you want AI literate students, students with AI skills? All the hands went up. And I said, right, keep your hands up if you're prepared to offer me a definition of what you mean by AI skills. And all the hands went down again. So they want something, but they don't know what it is. And this is all around the hype and the buzz of this. But if somebody is saying that they want something and students rock up and they haven't even thought about or articulated for themselves where that's what that is, then we're going to have a problem because we're doing them a disservice. How do we do that? Who's going to take responsibility for that? Where's that going to sit on your particular module, your particular program, department, or faculty? Well, this is what I think we should be doing. So here's the first step. I think we should seize the day. The image is supposed to represent the things that the four communication media and how we adopt them and utilize them on a day-to-day basis. So the ear is hearing. As babies, we listen first, then we start to babble, and then we learn to read, and then we learn to write. And in terms of the amount we use these things, they're also proportionally pretty much in that order for most people. So we listen most, we speak next most, we read next most, and we write the least. But in assessment practices, it's inverted. So we write the most, we read the next most, we speak next most, we listen the least in terms of what we assess. So our assessment is backwards of the skills that we are using in workplace or in life or whatever. So it's always been a wee bit anomalous. Much more so, I think that that's been put into relief, into sharp focus, because people are saying, well, what's the point of take-home written assessments if students are going to cheat? I think we say, hang on a minute, stop tarring all of our students with the same brush. First and foremost, we are in a bit of a liminal developmental space. Things will equalize eventually. But if you really want to think about that, think about the questions that I've got here. What is it that young people who are graduating from whatever program you work on, what is it that they need to know? That's the content of your degree. But also, what do we want them to be? What do we want them to be able to do? And it's the being and doing that I think are underserved in our learning outcomes and in our course content very often. And most importantly, in our assessments. So how well do the existing practices and designs of curricula measure across those things? And how much is weighted towards writing? I think if we critique our courses through that lens, doesn't matter if we're talking about AI, we're doing it for positive reasons because we're trying to rebalance communication skills in ways that employers have been saying for a long time. You know, you're sending me first-class graduates and they don't seem to be able to string a sentence together in a meeting. What's going on? I take that, right? I take that. So let's think about these things. The second thing is illustrated by this. Tony Short.
Relegé met de middelbare Socrates. De los Sastes Socrates.
Socrates. Hey, we know that name. Yeah. Hey, look him up. Oh, it's under Socrates. Oh, yeah. Socrates. The only true wisdom consists in knowing that you know nothing. That's us, dude. Oh, yeah. Let's bag him. Yeah.
So my cultural references don't get much more modern than that. That's from 1989, before some of you were born, no doubt. Great film. Where they collect people from history to complete a history project and get an A and therefore not have to go to military academy. But leaning into Socrates is something that I think we have to do here. Not necessarily the argument about technology of writing, but the only true wisdom is that you know nothing in this space. And this is a massive challenge to academics. In particular, we are used to being at the front of a space in front of these empty-headed vessels that we call students who know nothing and we know everything and they assume we know everything, and then we tell them loads of stuff and we can feel proud that we've told them loads of stuff. That transactional interaction and relationship has been breaking down for years because of access to the knowledge, the fundamentals, through much more accessible media online. Being able to assess the value and the quality of that kind of stuff is a growing skill, and the one we should be harnessing and developing. AI comes into the mix, and some of you will be sitting there thinking, I don't know the first thing about AI. I don't use it. I don't like it. I don't want to use it. So how do we position ourselves as experts in a space where half the people in the room in front of us are more skilled in using this thing than we are? And I think knowing that you know nothing or relatively nothing in this space is something that you can surface. My area of real passion is around compassionate education, care-based education, trauma-informed pedagogies, and so on and so forth. And one of the things I talk about a lot is manifesting vulnerability, to model to students that you don't have to appear to be a blooming expert in everything. And when we say there is no such thing as a daft question, we really are saying there's no such thing as a daft question. And that actually, sometimes you're going to ask me a question, I'm not going to know the answer. It's difficult depending on where you're at in terms of your career. Obviously, there are many caveats to that. But I think this is something that we could build as a sort of cultural norm. We're all learning this together. 3 years sounds like a lot, but in the grand scheme of technological things, it's nothing. Ask Socrates about the technology of writing. It's nothing in the grand scheme of things. Hasn't had time to be properly explored and evaluated and embedded, so we are learning together on this. I've explored this, I've tried this, I'm aware of that. Share with me your experiences. And I think it's absolutely essential that we do this, either in terms of not dismissing things out of hand, not being too quick to generalize, make assumptions about our students, but also in terms of being honest about how much that we know and how much that we don't know. The third thing that I wanted to share with you, the spaces for sharing. I think there's, this is a real opportunity, and you probably do this already, but have, I don't know, SharePoint or Google Drive or a website or something where you can share mini case studies or videos or whatever, and have a forum for this kind of sharing. This is exactly what we were doing at King's, where people would say, I tried this thing, here it is, this is what it looks like, it was brilliant, or it's absolute disaster, or whatever it is. So a couple of examples of that. Here's one that you can play with later if you want. Where did I link to it? I thought I put these all in the right order, but clearly I didn't. So this is not me, it's AI me. So it's in the same room that I'm in at the moment. You can see the same background, but that is not me. It's an avatar version of me. It will horrify some of you and amaze others.
Free to ask.
Oh, God. Yeah, that's typical. That is. That's really typical. Thanks a lot for making me look like an idiot. So the idea behind this is that avatar me will answer questions about anything that I plug into it. So I've grounded it in data. It's not just like open Gemini or open ChatGPT. And I can speak multiple languages, 100 languages. Sorry, he can. It's not working. Try it later. Anyway, the idea is that in multiple languages, I can answer questions about a thing that's specific. In this case, just the guidance on AI at King's. I could ground it in my course handbook. I could ground it in module content. It could answer those 24/7 queries that students have because they're working. They only start getting on with their coursework at 2 o'clock in the morning when I'm definitely not available to them. Some people think, this is great, this could really support me. Other people will be horrified. Hang on a minute, this looks like you're going to try and replace me with it. There's no consensus, but it's something that I've experimented with. A whole bunch of other things as well. Sorry, that didn't work. You can test out here. I'll just give you a few examples of this. So Many of you will be familiar with the idea of customizing tools like ChatGPT. This one is something that I produced with a colleague at King's called Anna Georgiades, who's an expert in psychosis. And what she wanted was for her students to be able to go somewhere that wasn't ChatGPT, to be able to answer questions about psychosis in a much more reliable way, ironically avoiding hallucination, given that she's talking about psychosis. So, for example, you can ask questions like, just list all of the papers and authors in the specific grounded data here. This is what's called a retrieval augmented generation system, a RAG system. And I pay $20 a month for a pro ChatGPT account, and I can do this in there, and anybody can use this if they've got a free account. And then I can ask questions based on these sources. Now, some people would say, but the point is they're supposed to be reading it for themselves. There's no consensus. You might be on that side of things. You might be on the more pragmatic side of things where do students have time? Is that the student's habit? Is that what happens? These are debates and arguments that we have to have an experiment with. There's another customized GPT on different assessment ideas. Have a look at that. And then there are things like this, where we're using AI agents to create interactive sources known as vibe coding, cheat coding, non-expert coding, whatever you want to call it. So here I have to choose a variant of a paragraph, and then it will tell me how AI it looks and feels based on some of the measures that are used to in AI detectors, which I'm not a proponent of, by the way. The perplexity and the burstiness, so how random it is and how predictable each word or token is in the flow. So that was something that I made that I thought was quite interesting. Lovable is another tool. I'm a big fan of ungrading, but you get a lot of arguments against it. So employers want grades. Well, here's a research-based quote and a citation to counter that argument. I think this is a really nice discursive tool. I made it using natural language only. I can't make a website that looks like this myself, but I can use an agent, in this case, Lovable, to create a resource that I then use in my teaching for discussion. Various other bits and pieces in here. You may have come across Notebook LM, which is proving really, really popular among students. You're a Google institution, I understand, so most of you will be familiar with this. You can take text. Again, you're grounding it. It's a RAG system. You can take text, interact with that text by asking natural language questions, and turn that into various different things, such as mind maps, fairly interactive mind maps, that kind of thing, automated podcasts, short animated videos, and so on. And they're much better than generalized outputs because you're grounding it in specific data. And then there are novelty things like this that I think are really quite interesting. It wasn't so long ago that if you wanted to edit an image like this one that I took of the Woolwich Ferry, which is just down the road from where I am at the moment, and put a spaceship in the sky, you'd have to use Photoshop and be fairly skilled to do it in an authentic way. But this horribly named tool from Google, Nano Banana, enables you to do it at the click of a mouse. I can say I want a hat, so I've got a hat. I can say I want my daughter to be a ninja, so my daughter's a ninja. All of this stuff you can do really swiftly. And it's great if you want to create a bespoke thing for a special occasion or particular image, but think about the connection between that and disinformation. Can we ever believe anything that we see in photographic form anymore, ever? Part of the, populist weaponry is sharing fake videos that are generated in AI. It's an absolute car crash in the social media land. So is our using of that advocacy, or can we use it as a way of counterpointing that, try and regain some of the benefits? I can't tell you. You need to decide. Just to finish off then, I want to offer you 3 AIs in the form of boxes. I've referred to Hephaestus, so I'm going to go with the first woman, now in Greek mythology, Pandora, who famously had a vase which had all the evils of the world. And when she couldn't resist looking inside, that gift from the gods. They were all released into the world, hence what we're experiencing right now, only retaining hope when you put the lid to the jar back on. But it's often called a box here. And I've got 3 boxes for you. The first AI is artificial intelligence. I've represented it in this way with the dead tree and the skull and crossbones. And it's also a black box. Even developers working in Silicon Valley or in the equivalent locations in China, developing these technologies, describe these tools as black box tools. In other words, what they've put in doesn't necessarily account for what comes out. There's lack of explainability and transparency. How can we, working in academia, condone the use of something that's not explainable with clarity, even by the people that built the darn things? On the other hand, think about the potentials and the use cases and the reality of use, and you put yourself into a difficult position. Are you going to be a pragmatist, a resistor, an enthusiast, whatever? Where are you going to locate yourself? The second AI is one that I think is probably more important than anything, and that's around academic integrity. And it's not so much, oh my God, everyone's going to cheat, but what is in that box? What is it that we are protecting? Because academic integrity is about protecting the rigor of our degrees and the fundamentals of the degrees. We put a lot of knowledge and content in those boxes. That's what we protect. That's what we stand by. That's what defines us as professionals. But actually, if I unchain that box and look inside, how much of that is actually usable and useful to 21st century graduates who are going to be still working in 2070 when I'm long dead, and they're trying to draw on skills that they studied at UCD or anywhere that they think, I wish we'd done more on this. I wish we'd done more on that. What else needs to go in that box? And then the final AI, I think, is around assessment innovation. There's a short article that summarizes this if you want to read it later. And this is the one where we use the leverage that is AI to do things that scholarship of teaching and learning has been telling us we should have been doing for a very long time, particularly if our goal is to be values-based, more inclusive, genuinely widen participation. We need to accept that there have been issues pre-ChatGPT, essay mills, workload, controversial things that people argue over, like attention spans. What is it that we're trying to do with assessment? Are they valid? Are they doing the job? Does a 5,000 word essay genuinely tell me how much somebody's learned and knows pre and post ChatGPT? How much more could we do that is focused on the process of learning, is iterative? How much more can we actually use this as an opportunity to be more compassionate, engage students more in dialogue, be more authentic, be more interactive, all of these kinds of things? And where do we need to think about maybe challenging some of the things that are accepted as conventions, such as, I don't know what it's like in Ireland, but in England, at least, if not the whole of the UK, anonymity as a standard for submission is pretty much a norm. But actually that comes with all sorts of problems. And I think we need to challenge that. But also what we define as cheating, what we define as plagiarism. Plagiarism is an inadequate term for the stuff that people are doing inappropriately with AI at the moment. So just to finish off then, I've been looking back the whole day, and I want to finish with this beautiful frieze that I saw when I was last in Rome. And that's to take 3 Latin words, we've got moved from Greece to Rome now, that form the basis of a lot of what we do in education, but have divergent meanings over time. Acidere, as this couple are doing here, meant to sit beside. And it's where we get the word assessment from. You know, sit beside, support, assess, see how you're doing, how you're getting on, tutorialing, mentoring, coaching, that kind of thing. But assessment now, for most people, means I'm going to check up on you. I'm going to make sure you can do this. I want to validate you. Maybe we could lean a little bit towards its original etymological meaning. Similarly with discutere, gives us discuss, but it also gives us dispute. And I think disputation is a real problem space for us to be in with our students. And finally, likewise, examinare, of course it means examine, but it also means to look really closely at and to understand, look in great detail. I think if we could lean more heavily into the more positive connotations of these words, that would sum up what we need to be doing in the AI space. So I set out to provoke you, and you've got 10 minutes to respond here, or you can join the course that we developed at King's and engage in the discussion forums, or you can keep it all in-house and argue amongst yourselves, or whatever you want. But I will finish there and open for questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Martin, for giving us a lot to think about there and sharing so generously.